Hi, my name is Nathan Miller. I'm a collaboration specialist with Microsoft. And today we're going to look at Microsoft SharePoint 2013 apps and how we can create the new app project models. Now let's take a look at creating a SharePoint app in the new SharePoint application model. There's one project template for the new SharePoint app model, and creating the SharePoint application is easy. You simply create a new SharePoint Visual Studio project using the SharePoint 2013 app template that's available in Visual Studio 2012. When you create the new project, Visual Studio prompts you for the URL to test the site that will be the target site for your application install when it's time to deploy, test, and debug your application. Each SharePoint application project created as a SharePoint hosted application contains a single feature which is used to add elements to an application web, such as a list, a page, and JavaScript files. Note that each SharePoint application project should contain exactly one feature, and the scope of this feature should be equal to the web, which means that the feature activates at the site within the web app. A new SharePoint app project is created with the following modules: a content module used to add CSS files and images to the app web, an images module used to add image for the application icon, a pages module used to add pages such as ASPX pages and HTML pages to the application web, and a scripts module for use to add JavaScript source files to the app web. Every SharePoint application requires a manifest file which is named appmanifest.xml. The Visual Studio project template for SharePoint application automatically adds this file and provides default values for all the required settings. When Visual Studio creates a new Visual Studio project for a SharePoint app, it automatically adds a start page named default.aspx. Inside default.aspx, it adds two content controls for the placeholders: placeholder additional page head and placeholder main. Inside the placeholder additional page head, Visual Studio automatically adds links to app.css and app.js. Placeholder main contains some sample markup for your app. This is where you add the HTML to create the user interface for your start page. While Visual Studio creates an app.css file for you, this file is initially empty. This is where you add the CSS and style HTML elements to your ASPX pages, as well as any other HTML pages that you might have in your project. Note that while you can directly edit the CSS rules by hand inside the app.css, there also is a visual editor that can be invoked by right-clicking the CSS file and select the Build Style context menu command. This can provide an effective utility for those developers that are working with CSS for the first time and not quite familiar with the syntax of CSS. We look at modifying the app.js file. Here's a simple example of writing a hello world JavaScript behind the default.aspx. This code uses a jQuery document ready handler to call sp.sod_execute function to register a callback function named SharePoint ready, which will fire when the page has loaded to the script file named sp.js. The sp.js is needed for the client-side object model. The code within the SharePoint ready function updates the user interface of default.aspx by updating the content in the div element with the ID of message. The application manifest file named appmanifest.xml is very important because it contains the application high-level metadata that's read by SharePoint during the application installation. The version of the app manifest shown in this example is very simple, and it represents just the initial settings of the application after you create a new project. Note that the SharePoint application has a named property that is used to construct the URL to the application start page. It also has an identifying GUID, which serves as a product ID. There is also a version number and a SharePoint min version attribute with a value of 15.0.0.0 that indicates that this application is required for SharePoint. The application manifest must specify an application principal using an application principal element. The internal setting is supplied by Visual Studio by default and can be used for SharePoint hosted apps. Testing an app in the new SharePoint application model is just like testing any other Visual Studio project. You are able to press F5 and actually go into a packaging and deployment and testing mode. This may take as long as 20 or 30 seconds to deploy your application for the first time you press F5 key. However, it's much faster after that. When you press F5 for the second time or third time, it's often deployed in about 5 or 10 seconds. Now let's take a look at creating and testing a new SharePoint application using the SharePoint application model for 2013. So I'll go ahead and go into File, New, and create a new project. Now you see that we've got two types of projects. We have Apps for Office 2013 and Apps for SharePoint 2013. So the Apps for Office is if I want to create an Office file that actually plugs into Word, Excel, or maybe an Outlook plugin. But we're going to look at the application for SharePoint 2013. Now notice that we also still have, under SharePoint Solutions, we still have all of the existing code that we've done for, and solution types that we've done for 2010. Those moved forward in 2013. But we also have so full support for Sandbox Solutions, full support for Farm Solutions. But we're really encouraging developers to use this new application model. The new application model just gives us a lot more flexibility for building applications into Office 365 as well as on-premise, and allows us to actually have this application updated and deployed without having to impact the farms the way we had with the Farm solution. And it doesn't have all the limitations that the Sandbox solutions gave us as well. So I'll go ahead and create a My SharePoint app just to show you the basics of the new application model. So when I create my SharePoint app, you'll notice that I've got a site to actually do this development and debugging against this site. And then I have the type of application that this is going to be. So you notice that we start with an auto-hosted app. The auto-hosted apps are more for Office 365, where we can actually deploy managed code, .NET code, as well as the SharePoint solution, all bundled into one solution, and just have that automatically hosted without us having to worry about which Azure instance or which IIS server we're going to put this managed code on. We also have a provider hosted, so if I actually have my company has an Azure instance out there, or we have an IS on-premise that we're going to host these applications in, we could actually use a provider-hosted model. In this case, we'll just go ahead and create a SharePoint-hosted model, just to show you the basics of this new application model. So now I've got a new application, My SharePoint app, and you notice that I've got multiple files in here as part of the solution. So I've got a content directory, a folder that actually has app.css, so if I want to do any kind of customized styles in my application, I could do that here. I've got my images folder, so if I have any images out here, notice that there's an app icon. So this is actually what the application gets installed with, so when I see the install or when I see it in the catalog, this is the application that it uses. I also have a pages where we've got a default.aspx, and so I could add any other custom pages I want to in this solution. And then every file that we get, we actually add jQuery in here, as well as we have an app.js file that we create by default. Now you can put your own JavaScript files in here, you could use your own JavaScript libraries. It's just part of the solution, but this is what we ship with out of the box. So as part of the solution, we also have an app manifest, and the app manifest is what controls the title of the application, the name of the application, any versioning on here. Again, that application icon, if we wanted to actually point to a different application icon, we can do that. And then which start page. So when I run this application, what's the first page I'm going to hit? And so in this case, it's our default.aspx page. And then our query string, which has the standard tokens. This is what we pass to the application to have context for the given hosted SharePoint environment. And then we have the hosted type. So we chose a SharePoint hosted solution. But as we add code to this, we can always change our mind and actually make it an auto-hosted app, or even make it a provider-hosted application. So you notice along the top we also have permissions. So if I wanted to add permissions so that my application can make a request to query a list from the site or the news feed, or maybe user profiles. So all of these permissions need to be added to the site. I just don't have access to that without adding it to the permission file in my application manifest. Also, any prerequisites that we have, so capabilities that our application depends on, we can add those. And then any language locales and resource files that we add to that as well. And then also any web proxies. So if I'm actually calling into services that are actually in remote domains, I may want to add that to this file here so that my application has access to those other web services as well. So we'll go ahead and close that, and let's take a look at the application.js file. So the application.js file, when we create this from a new application, you'll notice that we actually have the current context that we get of the site, as well as the current user. So what we do is actually wait for the document to be ready to load, and then we'll add get username. So the message in the main page of the application will actually just show hello and then the username that you currently have. In this case, we'll actually make it very simple, and we'll replace this with just a file that actually we'll take a look at as soon as the application finishes loading the document. We'll display a hello from my SharePoint application. So now we can actually go ahead and get ready to run this. So you notice here that we've actually got we target a message part in the document, and we actually replace it with our message. So you'll see in here that we've got our message down here. It starts with initializing, and then once the application and the libraries load, we'll go ahead and replace it with our hello world type of message. So we'll go ahead and save all of the files, and we're ready to debug and test this application. So once we've gone into debugging mode, it starts on our application page. So that application got installed into SharePoint. You'll notice that now we've got our replaced with hello from SharePoint application. And you'll notice the URL. So in this case, we've got our apps.contoso.com. This is our wildcard application space where all of our applications are going to run. This application is using the Chrome control, so you see that we've got our Chrome control for any of our news feeds or sites, and our going back to the main page of the portal as well. So once we've actually tested the application, we can close that down. And you'll notice that it actually unprovisioned the application, detaches the debugger. And say that we've actually gone through our full test cycles and we're happy with the way the application works. Now we're ready to actually deploy that application. So in that case, what we'll do is click on the application and we'll go to publish. So publishing the application, you'll notice that it comes up with this screen. The application type is an app for SharePoint, and the hosting type is a SharePoint hosted application. So once we actually run the publishing, we'll open up to that application package. So we created the publishing. This creates an app package, a .app file. But you'll notice that this application package, when we make a copy of it, we can actually rename this and just put a .zip on the end of it. So when I go into this package, you'll see we still have the .wsp file, but now we have the application manifest and some other assets files to this as well that help our WSPs get installed into the application environment. So once we're happy with the application, we get this app file, and we give this to our administrators to actually go into the app catalog and add this file to their application catalog for the corporate catalog. In this section, we focused on the new SharePoint 2013 application model, and specifically how we use SharePoint hosted applications.